This video is all about the third stage, the placenta, your cord, and all of your options. It's an organ that develops during pregnancy and is attached to the wall of your uterus, and it connects to your baby through their umbilical cord. The function of the placenta is to provide your baby with all the oxygen and nutrients they need while they're growing inside you. The placenta is approximately the size of a dinner plate. The placenta looks quite bloody and veiny. There are two sides, the maternal side and the fetal side. The maternal side is where the placenta attaches to the uterus, and that looks like a bit of a gross, meaty mess. And then the other side, which we more commonly see, is the fetal side, where the umbilical cord attaches to your baby, and all of the veins on that side make it look like a tree of life.
Physically, what happens in the third stage is that your placenta, whilst still attached, will continue to pump blood into the baby. Oxytocin in your body will keep your uterus contracting. This is released naturally and it needs the same kind of environment that birth needs. Whilst your uterus is contracting, it's getting smaller and your placenta will become detached from the uterine wall. This is where there's normally some bleeding. Your placenta can just sit until gravity is able to help it come out through your vagina. So if your placenta has become detached and is just sitting there, this isn't a bad thing and it's fine. But sometimes it does just need a bit of gravity. So sometimes you'll feel like you need to move in that moment, and you'll know what position is good and what feels right. And then your placenta will be born. The cervix, once your placenta is born, will begin to close again with the help of your natural hormones. We know that the environment for birth needs to be warm and safe, and the woman needs to feel supported and able to follow her body. And it's just as important in the third stage because it is still part of the birth. The birth is not complete until the placenta is born. So keeping all of those conditions the same is so important and will help for a smooth third stage.
So sometime after you birth your baby, the surges will start up again. The surges that are needed for the placenta are the same surges that were needed to get your baby out, but they can be a lot less intense. The placenta is softer and squishier than a baby, so there is less need for your vulva to stretch. The sensations that might come about due to your placenta shrinking down to the size of a pear from how big it was when it was holding your baby, which is 1,000 times bigger, can be quite painful. The after pains can be quite harsh. So anything that you want to do to ease that, then you should, including getting into the water, even if you weren't in the water. Using gas and air if that's available, or anything that makes you feel good. So while the uterus is doing its work using the oxytocin, then women can often feel the urge to bear down, just like they did with their babies. And depending on what position the woman's in, the placenta can just flop out. Some women say it feels like birthing a jelly or a jellyfish. You might be told that you are not allowed to birth your placenta in the water if that's where you've had your baby, and that is simply not the case. There are some good positions that you can use to birth your placenta, but as always, the best one is the one that your body is telling you. I've seen women give birth to their placentas in the water, which is your right to do, sitting on the toilet, and just anywhere they feel comfortable. Some women are quite concerned about their placentas going in the toilet because they wish to keep them, which we'll talk about later. So if you wanted to avoid the placenta going into the toilet, then you can lift the seat up, put a towel over, and then put the seat back down, and then you can easily catch the placenta.
There There are different options around birthing your placenta, and it's your right to choose which one is best for you. You can leave it to happen naturally, which is called a physiological third stage, or you can choose active management, where you will be assisted with the use of drugs and sometimes manual intervention to get your placenta to come out. A managed third stage involves being injected, usually in your thigh, with a synthetic hormone that forces your uterus to contract in order to birth your placenta. This process also includes cutting the cord prematurely sometimes, and a midwife or doctor applying pressure onto your uterus, and also traction or pulling on the cord. The pros of an actively managed third stage are that it can make the process quicker, and the average blood loss straight after birth is lower. The cons of an actively managed third stage include the side effects of the drugs given, which can include anything from nausea and vomiting, diarrhea, heart palpitations, and many other things. So it's really worth looking into those more. With an actively managed third stage, your golden hour with your baby can be interrupted, and there is a risk of your placenta becoming trapped inside your body if the ergometrin or the drug given clamps down your uterus before your placenta has been completely birthed. When we talk about birth options, we often talk about being able to pick and choose and being able to pick A and C but say no to B. And it's important to remember that when you're saying yes to intervention, often you're saying yes to a whole heap of other things. So in the case of a managed third stage, it's difficult to say yes to the injection of the drugs but no to the things that come with it, such as traction on the cord or pressure on the uterus, because the drug means that there is then a timescale with which that placenta needs to come out to avoid retained placenta and it being trapped inside your body.
And this just means that the placenta will be birthed naturally, and that involves basically just waiting and keeping the environment the same as it was for birth. So, as we said before, oxytocin is such a major part of the process. So, everything that you did to encourage oxytocin in birth, keep that the same when you're birthing your placenta, and that will help for a smooth birth of the placenta. It's often presumed or said that there's a time limit on how long this should take. This time limit doesn't really apply to a physiological third stage because the body is using its natural hormones to contract the uterus at its normal speed. It's not artificially sped up. Whilst you're waiting for your placenta to come out naturally, sometimes your placenta will detach from the wall and it will just be sat inside for a while, and that's okay. There's no rush to do anything about it, but sometimes gravity can help. So if you feel the need to move position, this can help to bring your placenta out. There are other things as well that can help encourage the contractions naturally. So things like breastfeeding your baby, skin to skin, anything that will encourage oxytocin will encourage your placenta to come out as well. The advantages of a physiological third stage is that there's no artificial hormones injected. So your body is working on its natural balance of hormones, and that isn't interrupted by anything artificial. There is no rush when you're birthing your placenta naturally. So the time limits that are put on you if you have a managed third stage, they don't apply when it's a natural third stage. Your cervix isn't going to close naturally whilst your placenta is still inside. You can be left alone to enjoy the first moments that you have with your baby and really take in that moment and have the skin to skin and encourage the bonding and breastfeeding without being interrupted by injections or someone pulling on the cord. The cons of a physiological third stage are that it can take longer. It's not being rushed along. Another disadvantage is that you might still be pestered by midwives because of the time limit that they're so used to. Because active management is such a frequently used approach that the time limit is deep set in their practice. So it might be the case that you feel pestered. This is something that you can lay out beforehand in your birth plan, that you don't want to talk about it or you don't want to be pestered, but just know that it's something that might happen. So writing in your birth plan how you wish to birth your placenta is really important, because if you are choosing a physiological third stage, having midwives ask you every 5 or 10 minutes if you would like the injection can be really off-putting, and it will affect your oxytocin flow. So stating this in your birth plan can be really helpful to keep them at bay.
When we talk about cutting the cord, it's often framed in terms of immediate and delayed. But really, it's early and it's optimal. It's waiting until the cord has stopped pulsating and all of your baby's blood has returned to your baby. It might be called cord blood, but it is your baby's blood, and it is your baby's birthright to have their own blood. It ensures that your baby gets their full quota of stem cells, which are the building blocks for their future from birth until death. It makes sure that your baby receives their full volume of blood as nature intended. It helps them with a natural transition to life outside of the uterus. There is no good quality evidence to suggest that there is any downsides to optimal cord clamping for a baby. There is an argument which there isn't a lot of evidence for, but it's still pervasive nevertheless, that if we were to leave the cord intact for the blood to go from the placenta into the baby, that there is a risk of the baby getting too many blood cells, increasing the chance of the baby having jaundice. But in fact, there are two kinds of jaundice. There is physiological, which requires no treatment, and there is pathological, which does. Yes, it can increase the chances of your baby having physiological jaundice, but in healthy babies, that doesn't come to anything and doesn't need treatment or attention. The World Health Organization estimates that 43% of all children under the age of 5 are iron deficient anemic, and the biggest cause of this is early cord clamping. There is no evidence to suggest that early cord clamping is ever a good idea, even if the baby is compromised in some way. The placenta is a resuscitation organ and it's best kept attached to the baby, especially as sometimes that's its only source of oxygen. There isn't and has never been any evidence to support the intervention of early clamping, and we do not know the long or short-term effects of early cord clamping on babies, or whether there's any accumulative effect of this intervention on future generations. It's a myth that still persists to this day that it's an emergency that requires immediate cutting. Even where we live in Manchester, if you dial 999 during a birth, the call handler will still advise you to find a shoelace, even just one from your shoe that's dirty from outside, so that you can immediately clamp and cut the cord when the baby is born. But there are many demonstrated risks of early cord clamping. Whatever you decide to do, just know that there is no rush to separate your baby from the placenta, because it is a piece of resuscitation equipment. It does deliver oxygen and nutrients to your baby. However, early cord clamping can be done as convenience for care providers who want to work on a baby without the inconvenience of carrying the placenta around.
If you choose to separate your baby from its placenta, there are a few ways of doing this. One option is burning the cord in a kind of ceremonial way. You can do this by using a candle and a heat shield of some kind to protect the baby from the heat, and gently burning the cord until it separates. This can be quite a ceremonial way of doing it, and it's very gentle. So burning the cord cauterizes it, which will stop any bleeding, but it also seals the end of the cord so it can prevent infection. In traditional Chinese medicine, it's said as well that burning stimulates the qi, or the life force, to move from the placenta into the baby. Burning the cord can produce a smell, so that's something to consider if you're particularly sensitive to smells at this point. Burning the cord can take a little bit of time, and it's quite fiddly, so you might need extra hands to hold all of the different components. Cutting the cord is an option, and probably the most frequently used option. The advantages of this are that it's quick and easy. Midwives will bring scissors to do this, or you can use your own, but you don't need to have any extra equipment. And the metal scissors can be sterilized as well. The disadvantages of cutting the cord with scissors is it can feel quite clinical. Using metal scissors, especially if they've been brought from a hospital. It leaves the cord open, which is a slight risk of infection. When deciding how to, or if you want to, separate your baby from your placenta, you have options there as well. So you have the options of using a clip or a tie, or using nothing at all. So again, there are pros and cons of this option as well. So cord ties can come in lots of different designs and colors, and they're really gorgeous. They're also soft and more comfortable for you and for your baby, and they can also be sterilized. Disadvantages of using things like clips are they're usually made of plastic, so they're quite solid and bulky, and they can get in the way. If you're breastfeeding or changing nappies, they can be a bit fiddly in that way. So there is always the option of using nothing to clamp your cord, because the cord will naturally clamp itself. It's known as physiological clamping, and it's where if you've waited for the cord to go white, there's no more blood flow through there, and the vessels clamp themselves. So you don't actually have to clamp the cord if you've waited long enough, but this can make midwives quite uncomfortable. So I suppose a disadvantage of doing that is that you might have some backlash from midwives. So you'll know if you've waited long enough when the cord has stopped pulsating. You can feel this yourself. So if your cord is white and floppy and you can't feel a pulse running through it, then it's already in the process of sealing itself, and you wouldn't need to use a clamp or a tie in order to separate the baby from the placenta.
After your placenta is birthed, we've gone through a few of the options for how to separate the cord through burning or cutting, but there is also the option of just leaving it attached, and this is called a lotus birth. A lotus birth is when the baby is left connected to the placenta until the unclamped cord naturally dries and detaches in its own time, usually after 3 or 4 days. During this time, the placenta can be rubbed with salt and herbs to help preserve it and to stop it from smelling. Some say that a lotus birth is a less invasive and more gentle transition for your baby from the womb to the world. Because you're not separating the cord, your baby is still getting all of the blood and nourishment that we spoke about through optimal cord clamping. And it's thought that there's less likely for your baby to experience injury around their belly button. For many, a lotus birth is considered to be a spiritual ritual that honours the shared life between your baby and their placenta. A lotus birth can also be really great for postpartum healing. When you're a new mum and you have a newborn and they're still connected to the placenta, it forces you to move more slowly and more carefully and minimally in those early days after your baby's born. And both the mum and baby can benefit from this healing process. There's no pressure and rush to bounce back when you've got a placenta in tow. Some cons of a lotus birth include the potential risk of infection. Obviously, after the placenta has detached, it does become dead tissue, and that is prone to infection. And when that's still attached to your baby, there is a risk of infection there. Many would advise just keeping a close eye on your baby, as you would anyway, being a new mum. There was one case study of a full-term baby that linked lotus birth with hepatitis in the baby, but there is such little research around this that more needs to be done to understand this potential connection. Sometimes women are reluctant to choose lotus birth because they would prefer to consume their placenta instead. And obviously, if your placenta has been left out and attached to your baby for a number of days, it's then not okay to consume it. But sometimes women do a combination of both and separate some of the placenta for them to consume it or encapsulate or turn into smoothies and still leave the cord attached to their baby. For some, a lotus birth is just too inconvenient. It's difficult to go anywhere with your baby while a placenta is still attached. And obviously any travel can then increase the risk of infection. So that kind of forces you to stay home. And for some women, this isn't what they want, and that's totally fine. You've birthed your placenta, you've separated it from your baby, if that's what you chose to do, but what can you do with it now? You can chuck it. Midwives, if you have midwives at your birth, can take this away and dispose of it for you if you don't want to keep it. It will usually be taken back to the hospital and incinerated. You can eat it. Some women like to use small bits of their placenta in smoothies, or they have it encapsulated so they can take it over a longer period of time. Another way to consume your placenta is through tinctures, and there's loads of stuff out there on how to do this for yourself, and there are also lots of wise women who do this for a living who you can contact and ask them to do it for you. Some women like to make art from their placenta, so it can be really beautiful to get some like watercolor paper or thick cartridge paper and use that to take a print of your placenta, either just with the blood that is naturally on the placenta, or sometimes women also add a bit of paint too. Some women also like to bury their placenta, and this is something that can be done whether you choose to lotus birth or to sever the cord through burning or cutting. Women feel unsure about whether to bury their placenta or not because it might not be their forever home, they might be in rented accommodation and they don't want to leave it behind if they have to leave. So it can be a great option to bury your placenta in a pot with a tree on top or a different plant, and then you can take it with you wherever you go.
So let's take a moment to think about the obstacles to having the third stage that you want. Common practice is to give the injection, and that obviously speeds things up. And the more midwives see that and facilitate it, the more naturally it comes for them to do that, and even to treat the physiological third stages as though they are managed, and to really have that time frame really at the forefront of their minds about the cervix closing and keeping the placenta inside. If you do want a physiological third stage, then talk to your midwife about it if you have a midwife. Write it in your birth plan, and then have your birth partner remind anyone who's there at the time of your wishes about your third stage. Because at that point, you'll be really deep in bonding with your baby, and there'll be a lot of hormones, and that time is incredibly fragile, and it's once in a lifetime, and you don't want to be advocating for yourself during that time. So have someone else do it who's very good at it and who you could trust. Another obstacle to doing whatever you want with your placenta at a time when the norm is to have it incinerated is the fact that it could be second nature to your midwives for them to take the placenta with them and throw it out. That's normal for them. So if you do want to do something with it, have that conversation ahead of time, have it in your birth plan, and have someone else remind them of your wishes. You do not have to say what it is that you want to do with it. You don't have to justify that to anybody. Just say that you'll be keeping it. Women who give birth in hospital are often told, too often told, that they are not allowed to take their placentas with them, even if they have managed to avoid it being sent straight to the incinerator, and they've managed to find a fridge for it, and it's labelled and it's clearly theirs. Sometimes they are told that they are not allowed to take it with them and that it's the property of the hospital. That is not the case. It's a part of your body, and you can very much do whatever it is that you want with it. An obstacle related to cord cutting, again, comes down to what the people around you are used to seeing and used to doing. And if your baby at birth needs a little bit of help breathing or getting started, it's often quite reflexive for a midwife to cut the cord so that they can more easily work on the baby. And that obviously is an issue now that we've learned about the dangers of early clamping and cutting that baby off from their blood and nutrient supply and the implications that can have for the rest of that baby's life. It's okay, even in an emergency, to state your wishes because you always do have options. It's okay, even in that moment, to say, I need you to leave my baby attached to its placenta, and for the midwives to work around that.
We are doulas, so we do attend births, and we have lots of information on placentas and the third stage if anyone wants to contact us directly and ask us more questions on this topic. We also have an Etsy shop where we sell cord ties that Ellie and Laurie have made. So feel free to have a look at those. And we also offer placenta encapsulation service. So if this is something that you're interested in or you're looking into, want more information, just give us a shout.